6 months, 183 days, 4,392 hours. Sasha tallied these numbers in the fleeting moments when his mind, crushed by the vice of deadlines, momentarily loosened its grip. This wasn't a ritual of grief, but an obsessive count, an attempt to impose order on the chaos that had reigned within him since the day cancer took his mother. The same disease that had once taken his grandfather. In the Nesterov family, there seemed to be a cruel succession. After the funeral, he wasn't allowed to grieve properly. The bitter aftertaste of farewell was immediately washed down with the acid of urgent work tasks. He tried to convince himself that work was his salvation, a cure for the soul's pain. But deep down, in the very core of his tired, hounded soul, he was acutely aware of the lie in that notion. The decision didn't come from him. It was dictated by a frantic schedule and a boss whose soul seemed carved from a block of ice. Sasha would forever remember the phrase he'd accidentally overheard from the break room. "So what? People die every day." His boss had said that, pouring himself coffee. A simple statement of fact. For a man who had never known his parents, it was incomprehensible what it was like to lose a mother. In some twisted way, one could try to understand him, but Sasha had no such intention. Instead of understanding, a quiet, cold fury grew within him, like a knife blade hidden close to his heart. It was with this blade inside him that he jumped out of the taxi and rushed to the bus station, trying to catch the last bus to the village of Korchanovo. In childhood, when his mother and grandfather were alive, the name had baffled him, no connection to cabbage. Now he clutched a crumpled ticket in his hand and shuddered at the thought of the lecture his grandmother would give him. He had promised to arrive during the day, but his boss, for whom the death of an employee meant nothing, had piled on more work. The whims of old women from backwater villages didn't even register on his list of priorities. Grandmother Vera Nikolaevna was a woman of steel and flint. Having survived a hungry childhood and the war, she recognized no weakness. And after the death of her only daughter, her demands on her grandson became absolute. A given word to her was an unbreakable vow. A man gives his word, a man keeps it, she would say. It didn't matter what unforeseen circumstances arose. If you gave your word, you kept it, even if your legs were torn off in the process. The bus station platform was almost deserted, whipped by a cold wind carrying the smell of diesel and despair. And there it was, his transport. The sign saying Korchanovo hung crookedly. The bus itself, a red Icarus, seemed less a vehicle and more an artifact exhumed from a mass grave. It stood there, staring at Sasha with its extinguished, sunken headlight sockets. Rust consumed its body in intricate patterns resembling a map of unknown lands. The windows were so thickly coated with grime and dust that it was impossible to see inside. A persistent feeling arose that this bus hadn't been washed since the day it rolled off the assembly line. The queue to board consisted of silent, apathetic figures, mostly rural laborers returning from the city. Their faces were withered, their gazes murky and fixed on nothing. They moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid to spill the last drops of their life energy. They resembled living corpses, conserving every kilocalorie. No laughter, no conversations, just an oppressive, crushing silence, occasionally broken by the rustle of clothing. The only thing that sparked a faint glimmer of something remotely resembling interest in Sasha was the bus number A240SN. His analytical mind immediately latched on to the pattern. 240 was his apartment number. ASN were his initials, Alexander Sergeyevich Nestorov. A coincidence, a stupid, meaningless coincidence. But in the prevailing gloom, even it seemed like a small sign, a clue that meant nothing. It lifted his spirits slightly, and the boarding queue passed unnoticed. The ticket inspector, a woman with a waxen face and an empty gaze, mechanically checked his ticket and gestured him aboard with a nod. Inside, it smelled of old, dusty plush, gasoline, and something else, sweetish and musty, like in an abandoned basement. The interior was as ancient as its exterior. To his relief, more than half the seats were empty. He chose a window seat, leaned back on the worn-out seat, and closed his eyes. The fatigue and monstrous lack of sleep over recent days were stronger than he was. As the bus pulled out, moving onto the city's evening streets, Sasha plugged in his headphones, and within minutes, he was out. He woke to a feeling of complete silence. Not the kind from the station, but an unnatural, deafening silence, like in a tomb. The bus was empty. He took off his headphones. The music had long ended. Outside was a deep, impenetrable night. He looked at the time on his phone. It showed that the ancient Icarus was at least 2 hours late. Outside, darkness rushed past, from which the silhouettes of pine trees occasionally emerged, like black sentinels of this God-forsaken road. Not a single light in the distance, no signs of life. He checked his phone, no signal, no internet, complete isolation. When did everyone get off? Flashed through his head. And at that moment, a cough came from somewhere behind. It turned out he wasn't alone. Some guy, clearly from the countryside, with a sleepy and somewhat stupid face, rose from his seat, peered out the window, and muttered something about night having fallen. Sasha thought he'd just been sleeping across 2 seats, hence he'd gone unnoticed. wanting to dispel the strange feeling and find out how much longer, he asked him. The guy, who introduced himself as Timocha, squeaked that he didn't know and expressed his only desire to smoke. Sasha decided to take action. Staggering in the gently swaying bus, he trudged to the driver's cabin. At the wheel sat the same huge, bald man, his face like polished granite. When asked about Kochanovo, the man, without turning, grunted, "Half an hour." Sasha, trying to be polite, asked for a stop, mentioning both his own needs and Timocha's desire to smoke. The driver snorted irritably, mumbling something about that Timocha always wanting to smoke, but promised to stop soon. Satisfied with at least some answer, Sasha trudged back, noticing that Timocha had moved to the seat directly behind him. Timocha asked what the driver had said. Learning about the stop, he perked up. He asked Sasha's name and introduced himself, Timocha Savelov. Then he asked if Sasha was from the city, and getting an affirmative, asked where he was headed. Sasha replied that he was going to his grandmother, Viera. Timocha, apparently to make conversation, tried to guess who it was, running through neighbors from the middle of the street in his head. But at that moment, the bus began to slow, pulling over to the side of the road, to an equally dilapidated Soviet-era bus stop, one of thousands across the country. 2 minutes, the driver bellowed without turning. We're late as it is. Timocha groaned with satisfaction, jumping out of the bus. He immediately, without wasting a second, pulled out a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. Want one? He offered Sasha. He refused, saying he'd quit, and walked behind the stop into the darkness to relieve himself. Standing in the cold dark, he heard the flick of a lighter behind him, then the driver's voice. And where did that one go? And Timocha's reply, gone for a piss. Sasha couldn't understand why it was taking so long. He seemed unable to stop. His body wasn't listening. Let's go. Did you die in there or what? The driver shouted again, and that finally made Sasha finish. He zipped up and headed for the bus. Timocha, stomping out his cigarette butt, was already getting in. Sasha stepped in after him and froze. The bus was almost full of people. They sat in silence, motionless, staring into the emptiness before them. Not a sound, not a whisper, not a sigh, as if they had materialized from the night's gloom in the 2 minutes he'd been gone. Sasha hovered in the aisle for a few seconds, unable to process this surreal turn. His tired brain, refusing to work, simply forced him to move mechanically to his seat and sit down. He didn't ask Timocha. The word stuck in his throat like a lump, but tension, heavy and sticky, had already settled in the back of his head. Karen's ominous voice continues the terrifying journey. The bus moved on, and the worm of doubt began to gnaw at him from within. Where did they come from? There was no one at the stop. How did they all enter so silently in 2 minutes? But his body overpowered his mind, and exhaustion consumed him again. He fell into a heavy, restless sleep. He awoke to complete silence again. About 15 minutes later, all the passengers except Timoka, in absolute ringing silence, without a single word, without looking around, as if on an invisible command, simultaneously rose and began to exit. They were like programmed marionettes. A silent, single mass, they crossed the road and disappeared into the black maw of the night forest. No flashlights, no conversations. They just walked into the thicket. At night, a crowd, into the forest. "Timofey!" Sasha called out, and his voice sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. "Timofey!" Timoka turned. "Huh? Who were they? Where? Those people?" "Ah, them!" Timoka waved a hand. "Local workers." There wasn't a drop of doubt or surprise in his voice. "And they work in the forest at night?" Sasha pressed. Timoka first squinted, as if examining an idiot, then smiled a strange, strained smile. "Nah, there's a clearing there. They're going to the next village." "This is all very strange," Sasha muttered. "You're just tired, Sanya. That's why everything seems strange." Sanya. The familiar address grated on his ears. Sasha hated it when strangers were so familiar. Country folk, what can you do? But some kind of explanation, even a ridiculous one, had been given, and his mind, craving peace, clung to it. The last 15 minutes of the journey passed in silence. Sasha plugged his headphones back in, though he couldn't hear the music. He just wanted to isolate himself. Timoka, seeing the conversation was going nowhere, stared out the window. Finally, the bus stopped. "We're here," Sasha heard, removing his headphones. He looked out the window, and a cold trickle of anxiety ran down his spine. This wasn't the right stop. The one by his grandmother's village was blue. He remembered that for sure. This one was red, and the paint was so peeled and faded, it was clear it hadn't been painted in 10 years. And he had been here just 6 months ago for the funeral. Timoka was already getting off. Sasha didn't move from his spot, pressing into the seat, his eyes darting over the familiar yet alien landscape. "We're here," I said. The driver barked again, now with irritation. "This isn't the right village," Sasha said, approaching the exit. "I need to get to Kochanovo." "Well, this is Kochanovo. Last stop," the driver snapped. "Not Kochanovo, Kochanovo," Sasha insisted, feeling panic rising in his throat. The driver frowned, his face twisting into a grimace of anger. "I said last stop," Get out! I'm not going any further. Then where is Kochanovo? How should I know? You brought me to the wrong place. Where were you going? To Kochanovo. And what does your ticket say? Sasha, with trembling hands, pulled out the crumpled ticket. Here, Kochanovo. The driver snatched the ticket from his hand and jabbed it with a dirty finger. See here? See? Kochanovo means you got on the wrong bus. Sasha went cold inside. That was impossible. He had checked the route and platform number 10 times. He always double-checked everything. It was a professional deformation of an analyst. And would the ticket inspector have let him on with a ticket to a different village? Come on, the driver continued. Wrong bus. Stop messing with my head. Get out, now. Where am I supposed to go in the middle of the night? Sasha's voice trembled. What's it to me? Let's go back. I'll pay, Sasha almost pleaded. But the driver just flared his nostrils, and Sasha saw something frightening in his eyes, devoid of all humanity. I said, last stop, get out or I'll help you. Arguing with this bruiser was pointless. Sasha obediently stepped off the bus. Timokha was smoking at the stop. The bus roared away, engulfing them both in a cloud of acrid, stinking smoke, and disappeared into the darkness. Well, you really did it, Sanya, Timokha smirked, grinding the butt into the dust with his foot. Some bullshit, Sasha muttered, feeling the ground give way beneath him both literally and figuratively. So what are you gonna do? No idea. Timokha clicked his tongue, adjusting his grubby cap. Let's go to the village. You can see the constable. Sort it out. Maybe they'll give you a ride. The captain's an all-right guy. They turned off the highway onto a dirt road, and the village appeared just around the bend, ghostly and silent in the light of the full moon. The moon hung in the sky, unnaturally large and bright, casting sharp, black shadows. The street was deserted. Not a soul, not a light in the windows, not a barking dog. Only a few street lamps, more like funeral candles, dimly lit the road. How could you mix up the bus? Timokha kept on. I don't know, Sasha answered honestly. I'm tired. Slept maybe 3 hours in the last 2 days. That's city life for you. They pay good, at least. Worth all the suffering? What's it to you? Flashed through Sasha's mind. He hated talking about money. It's fine, he squeezed out dryly. Explains now, by the way, why I don't know your granny, Timokha tossed out. Reaching the first house on the street, Timokha stopped sharply. This is my house. Sorry, can't invite you in. My old man's a senile nutjob. Wouldn't understand. Sasha felt all the feigned country boy ease vanish from Timokha's voice. a metallic note appeared, a sense of alienation. "Well, see ya," Timoka said curtly, not even looking at him or offering a handshake. He just turned and walked quickly towards the gate, disappearing into the thick raspberry bushes. "Timofey, wait!" Sasha shouted after him, seized by a sudden, irrational fear of being left alone in this dead place. But Timoka didn't turn around. He just sped up. Sasha, unable to control his anxiety, stepped through the gate and followed him. "Where's the constable?" he shouted again. Timoka, without turning, almost broke into a run. Sasha, clenching his fists, rushed after him through the prickly branches, gaining on him. Timoka broke into a sprint, and a moment later vanished around the corner of the log house. Sasha, panting, ran around the corner. Timoka was gone, as if he'd evaporated. But on a wooden bench, leaning against the wall of the house, sat a bearded man. His face was hidden in shadow, but when he noticed Sasha, he slowly, with an unfriendly smirk, turned his head. His eyes glinted in the moonlight. The man silently, without taking his eyes off Sasha, reached for the handle of an axe sticking out of a huge log block next to the bench.
"Come to steal?" His voice rasped viciously, tearing the night's silence. Sasha was taken aback. "No, I wanted to ask for Timofey." "Get out of here. Go on." He rose, his shadow falling on Sasha like a huge black spot. He yanked the axe from the block with force. The metal gleamed, cold and sharp. "I just wanted to ask where the constable is here." Sasha tried to speak as calmly as possible, but his voice betrayed him with a tremble. "Further down the street, on the right," he grunted, not lowering the axe. "Thanks." Sasha squeezed out and began to slowly retreat towards the gate, not turning his back. "Sorry." "Which Timofey were you asking for?" the man suddenly asked, and a strange curiosity sounded in his voice. "Timofey Savelev said he lives here." The man frowned even more, his eyes narrowing to slits. He was silent, and the silence began to press on Sasha's ears. "He died about 5 years ago." The words hit like a blow from the axe handle. Icy goosebumps ran down Sasha's skin. The hair on the back of his neck stirred. He didn't answer. He just turned around and, trying not to run, walked quickly, almost at a run, away from that house, from that bearded man with the axe, from those words. He was afraid to look back, fearing to hear heavy breathing and the stomp of feet behind him. But there was only oppressive silence behind.